Auburn falls to Georgia in a classic on the Plains, 27-20. This rivalry continues to live up to all the magic that it is in the history as well. Will Maness joins as we talk this game and what can Auburn take away from a hard-fought loss against the number one team in the land.
Pile in here and make yourself feel at home. The crowded booth is coming on. The Crowded Booth with Bryce Koon.
Happy Monday, everyone. We welcome you in here on the Crowded Booth. Bryce Koon, Will Maness. Ralph's driving the big brown truck around. He's going to be on later tonight on the live show.
Mr. 175K.
Mr. 175K a day. Hashtag it here in the comments down below. But hey, thanks so much for tuning in. Make sure you subscribe, whether it's on YouTube or Apple Podcast or Spotify as well. Also on Google Play, which I'm not even sure if I know what Google Play is. Apparently it's a podcast feed, but we're on there. So I don't really know.
I thought it was just like Google's version of the App Store. I don't know.
I have no idea. Not a clue. I don't know anything. Welcome to the I Don't Know Nobody podcast. So we still got to make those shirts. No, all seriousness. Auburn with a tough loss, 27-20. Will was going through it. We talked about him going live, a live watch along. They might have dialed the suicide hotline at points. I don't know.
No. It wasn't
that bad. It wasn't that bad. You're actually pleasantly surprised with the way this team plays. Before we kind of get into the nitty-gritty, talking offense, defense, and then what they need to work on going into the bye week, just tell me your overarching thoughts. Leaving this game, obviously it hurts knowing how close you were to winning it, but I think there's still a lot of the positives you can take away from their performance.
Absolutely. I mean, this is the best Auburn's played all year. There's no doubt about it. They came into this game fired up, thought they would, being a big rivalry game. Didn't think they'd play as well as they did. They come in two touchdown underdogs at home, and they lead for a big chunk of this game, end up losing 27-20. We knew the Auburn crowd was going to be into it. They made it a big game, the all Auburn, all orange game. It's one of my favorite games every year. I should have gone. I should have gone to the game. And it's interesting. Auburn, coming into that game, had won, was it? Oh, I can't remember the graphic. It was 4 straight.
Time.
The Auburn crowd was into it. We knew they would be. It was going to be a great environment in Jordan-Hare Stadium. Auburn marketed it as a huge game. They made it the all Auburn, all orange game, which is one of my favorite games every year. I hate I didn't go. I should have gone. Coming into this game, interesting note, Auburn had won 5 straight games at home against the number 1 ranked team in the country. And I was at all 5 of those games, even against Florida in 2001. I was there. I remember being there. Just 4 years old. I actually do remember being there. So it was a big game. All Auburn, all orange is always a fun game. I was thinking about it today, Bryce. When we were growing up, Tommy Tuberville's the head coach at Auburn. Tuberville really kind of pushed orange as Auburn's color. He really he wanted everybody to wear orange. So, to me, it's what I know, and it's interesting. My dad and my parents and their friends that they went to Auburn with, they wear blue to the game, and I'm usually the only one in orange. So, generational thing. I love wearing orange to Auburn games. It feels like you have that luck with orange. And those all Auburn, all orange games, 2013 Iron Bowl, Alabama number 1, Auburn won it. 2017, interesting, the Georgia game in 2017 was what Auburn calls the true blue game. They want everybody to wear navy. But the Alabama was all Auburn, all orange in 17 and 19. So it's a big game. It's always a fun game. It looked like a fun game. I wish I'd have been there. But I really didn't have faith that Auburn was even going to keep it close. But they really played great on both sides of the ball. And we'll get into it more later. I really think the lack of depth for Auburn really cost them.
Yeah, we'll talk about a couple of those things. And you mentioned, I think we were all kind of, I don't want to say drinking the Kool-Aid, because I think that nationally people thought that Georgia would cover. They knew this could be a tough game. Myself, you, and Palmer Toms, for some reason, you haven't watched the Georgia-Auburn game. Maybe go watch the preview, watch the game, and then come back and watch this recap of the game. That would be a nice little schedule of events for you. But yeah, you mentioned, look, you and I have both been in the building when it's that 2017 Auburn-Georgia game, which was just absolutely nuts. I say this, I say this, Will, having had a past of being a Georgia fan, obviously with the LSU helmet behind me. longtime rival Georgia Tech. That game really needs to happen again. We just won't even talk
Yep.
about that today. But all things saying, it's one of the better environments of college football, and it's it's the better fan bases that I would say is loyal to being there
Mhm.
in the good and bad,
Absolutely.
in the good
Yeah,
and bad
and
as well.
Hugh Freeze took a lot of heat for saying he doesn't really feel the hate and the rivalry, but I mean, if you look at even folks outside the rivalry, it's viewed as just this long-standing mutual respect by both fan bases for both programs, because both programs have been wildly successful in the history of the programs. I mean, Georgia's got a national championship from the 1940s, and obviously they were dominant in the 80s. Auburn's got that championship from the 50s. Auburn was dominant in the 80s as well. So just histories of winning on both sides, and it's really just a big mutual respect from both
It's a
sides.
it's a border war too.
Mhm. Played right here in
Yeah.
Columbus
Yeah,
for a
border
long
war.
time.
Exactly. Let's roll into the offense here. Will, one thing you and I rewatched the game right before we hopped on this podcast. We can point out the 2 for 12 on third down, something that really hurt Auburn in this game. Georgia was able to kind of match that, in the sense a little bit better, 61%. That's the big disparity.
Mhm.
That's the big disparity. But overall, I mean, you walk away feeling like, hey, I feel more confident on Peyton Thorne. You even said on the phone, and I'll let you do it here. I'll let you put your hand up. Maybe Peyton Thorne wasn't the issue with this team.
Hand up, hand up. I've really gotten on Peyton Thorne a lot. Expectations were high for him. Coming in from Michigan State, he'd won 10 games. Got him to the Peach Bowl, I believe, if I'm right. But won 10 games 2 years ago for him. Took a step back last year, lost his starting job. So expectations were high because he's a guy that's been successful at the Power 5 level in the Big Ten. Obviously the SEC is a totally different animal. He's been adjusting. I hinted at it in the preview on Thursday. Something has been off with his clock, his biological clock, his quarterback clock, whatever you want to call it. He hasn't found that rhythm. Hadn't been on the same page with his receivers. He hasn't been wanting to run the ball, and he showed in this game that he's a real threat to run the ball. But he played really well, and going back and watching it and kind of studying the receivers, especially the last couple weeks, I think the receivers are the problem with the offense, not as much Peyton Thorne. I thought Thorne's decision making was really, really good in this game. To back him up and kind of get on the receiver some, Thorne was 10 of 19 passing, 9 incompletions. 6 of those incompletions, the ball hit the receiver in the hands. So, if you hit the receiver in the hands, you got to expect Auburn to come up with it. Some of those plays were really, really good plays by Georgia. The biggest one that stands out, I think it was a 3rd and 9. I think it was in the third quarter. Auburn's driving, and they throw an out route to Malcolm Johnson, and it's a perfectly thrown ball on the back shoulder away from Everett, who had a really, really good game for Georgia. I think he kind of won this game for Georgia with his play defensively in the secondary. But it was a great throw by Thorne, hit Johnson right in the numbers, and Everett just knocks it out of his hands. So that one you can give a pass to the receiver. It was just a really great play by the DB. And that was kind of the theme of this game. I think Georgia having more playmakers and better playmakers really just went out and won this game.
Yeah.
But Auburn ran the ball incredibly well, 219 yards against Georgia. I don't think anybody expected that. And they did it as a team. Thorne obviously had the long 61-yard run early. It was a really, really good play. The play design, the coaches, they schemed that one up and won that one during practice during the week. Having 2 tight ends pull, it was as a formation. They go pistol wing with 3 tight ends. Fairweather, if you go back and watch, he's at the top of your screen, split out wide to block, and the other 2 linebackers tight ends, pull across and lead the way for Thorne, and it's just executed beautifully. Thorne ended with 92 yards. Jarquez Hunter, 19 carries, 59 yards. Brian Battie, who has really, really carved out a role in this offense. He's been really impressive stepping into that running back 2 role vacated by Damari Austin, who's unfortunately out with injury. He had 8 carries for 35 yards. Robbie Ashford added 33 yards and a touchdown. Jarquez Hunter had the other rushing touchdown. So Auburn's identity is obviously running the football. And the goal in this game for Auburn is obviously to try to stay out of 3rd and long so you can lean on that run game and be able to run for first downs. But Georgia, they're really good. There's a lot of problems with this offense, especially in pass pro. And I don't know if it's on the offensive line or the quarterback, Bryce. We went back and watched some of the plays, some of the sacks from Georgia. It's just a complete breakdown by the offense, by Auburn's offense. They just not touching. It's Georgia like they had a free rusher. There was 2 sacks in particular. Both tackles just missed the guy on the outside. They just didn't even like they didn't want to block him. So, I don't know who to pinpoint with that. I don't know if it's the offensive line not picking it up. I don't know if it's Peyton Thorne not picking it up. But this is a running team. This is a running offense. They ran it very, very well against Georgia. Talking with some Georgia fans, they're really disappointed in the linebackers. They think this is the worst linebacker group, just talent-wise, that Kirby Smart's had. And, great job by Auburn to take advantage of it.
Yeah, because you still got to take advantage of it. I mean, that's something, too, that I don't think a lot of people necessarily get. Like, it's really easy to point, well, Georgia's not as good. Well, there's still 11 other guys that have to produce. And Auburn did a really good job of showcasing the run game. One stat that I was really, really interested in watching, we talked about Georgia, and Auburn. Georgia getting a slow start, Auburn needing to start fast. One thing I think a number they can improve on, Will, maybe it's play calling, maybe it's just, I don't really know what goes into this, but the average yards gained on first down was just 3.2. If they can get closer to that 4-yard mark, I think that's something where you really start to feel more confident. And you saw when they stayed ahead of the chains, and this might just be something to say, well, duh, not Robbie Ashford necessarily, but I mean, Ashford during his drives, you could tell he was a little bit more comfortable, but then Peyton Thorne as well, whoever was under center. You could see the confidence build from the offense as a whole. I wanted to ask you this because we were talking about, just personnel-wise. This is from a person who is not an Auburn fan and myself, but has always obviously had a vested interest in watching what Auburn does. Auburn, to me, and you tell me if I'm completely wrong, has always felt like a team that brings in really, really good athletes with the potential to make them into polished football players. Not a team that really brings in high-level polished football players. Is that something recruiting-wise they're going to have to continue to kind of get better at, especially the wide receiver position? Because I feel like you got a ton of athleticism out there. It's just not polished guys that are catching the ball at a high rate, I would say.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head, and that's really shown in the last decade, kind of with Gus Malzahn. He was recruiting high 4-star and some 5-star, just athletes. Like Anthony Schwartz, perfect example. Dude's a track star, and try to put him at wide receiver, try to groom him into a football player. But you can even go back as far as Tommy Tuberville. Tuberville, he would take some 2-star guys, some 3-star guys, and turn them into all SEC players, especially on the defensive side of the ball, which was his specialty. But Auburn has done that, and it kind of comes down to coaching. I think you've seen it, especially on the defensive side of the ball, because the coaches that Auburn's had on the defensive side of the ball the last 10 or 15 years are some of the best in the country. Kevin Steele, great example, coaching up linebackers, coordinating that defense. You look at a guy like Marcus Woodson, who's now at Arkansas. He's known for his recruiting prowess, but he really, really helped develop that secondary. He coached Carlton Davis during his time at Auburn. You see him now lighting it up in the NFL with the Buccaneers, won a Super Bowl with them. He's really there. He's emerged as their number 1 corner the last few years. So, you can do that when you have the great coaches. I think Auburn, maybe lacked that. I don't want to hammer on the coaches for not developing guys, but, and some guys just don't pan out. So it's kind of a risk. I would say it's a high risk, high reward, especially with the landscape now. Tommy Tuberville he did it and had a lot of success with it, but it was a totally different world 20 years ago when he was Auburn's head coach. And now the expectations raised at Auburn with how good Alabama and Georgia have been. So Auburn, they're on the right track. They had 10 5-stars recruits on campus this weekend to catch this game, and it was a great environment. Exit interviews look great for Auburn. Really impressed a lot of recruits, but you got to get better players, and that was the difference in this game.
Yeah, and I know this is guy's far off. He's a 2025 kid. Ryan Williams is the best receiver that I've ever seen in person. I got a chance to watch him up at the Under Armour Atlanta camp back in February, and he's already committed to Alabama, obviously, but Auburn had him on campus along with his quarterback over there at Saraland, so that's going to be something to keep an eye on as well. I mean, if they can give it success, it'd be interesting.
If Auburn can land him, if they can hang on to Perry Thompson, if they can hang on to Bryce Kane, in 3 years, you're looking at maybe the best receiving core in the SEC. You've got Thompson, who's a 5-star, can just go up and get it. Kane's a 4-star who can really fly. They're looking at him to come in and be that slot guy. And then Ryan Williams, who I don't know a ton about him. You probably know more than me, but he kind of just seems like a do-it-all receiver.
Oh, he's he was the best receiver, and he was a year younger than everyone else. And I think that's
Mhm.
what stood out. I mean, you had some 2023 kids there. You obviously had the big names in the 2024 class, but as a 2025 kid, the kid was a sophomore at the time, and he was the best receiver there, and it wasn't even close. So I think he's the number one receiver in the country, if I'm not mistaken. I know LSU commit to Corian Moore might be number two in the country, but I think Ryan Williams might be number one. But hey, look, just getting those guys on campus and showing, Will, I mean, I think the biggest thing you could say as we kind of round out the offensive discussion here, you showed identity. You showed where you want to get. Now it's about attracting that talent. But as for the rest of the season, I mean, you feel comfortable with Peyton Thorne behind the helm and continue to lead, especially if he's pulling the ball out, tucking it, and running, which he showed an innate ability. What was it, a 61-yarder that he had a big game?
Had a big 61-yarder. He had a keeper on a 4th and 2 and converted the first down. You know, I said it after the A&M game. You know, he's not been a threat running the football. The guys coming off the edge, the guys that he's reading, they don't even look at him. And I saw it even more against Georgia, like on that 4th down, or he had another run and picked, I think it was a 2nd and 9, and picked up the first down. Smile Munden was the read guy, and he didn't even look at Thorne, and Thorne just ran right by him. I mean, if he can continue to be a threat in the running game, you got to leave him out there because you know he's the best passer that Auburn has right now. He's a better passer than Robbie Ashford. Robbie, they're still developing. Robbie looked good in his limited action. I mean, he runs the ball great. That's no question. He only threw one pass. It was just a little swing pass to Brian Battie. So small sample size, but he looked comfortable on that throw. He knew where he wanted to go with the ball, and he put it on the money. Sometimes those swing passes, they're tougher than they look because you want to lead your guy, you want to get it to him, you know. So it's, you know, he looked comfortable, but you know, like I said, I've been hard on Peyton Thorne. He played his best game, no doubt about it. You know, I like him moving forward, especially if he's going to continue to be a threat in the running game because that just opens up so many other things for this offense.
And the bye week couldn't come at a better time. We're going to talk Thursday about that more as well. Let's talk defense, though, here.
One more note on the offense.
Go ahead.
It was a 7th straight game against Power 5 opponent that Auburn has not thrown for 100 yards, just 88 against Georgia. You only throw for 88 yards against Georgia, and you only lose by 7. You got to feel good coming out of this game about your offense.
Yeah. No, it's to go wire to wire with the number one team in the country and really not have a semblance of a passing game. I mean, I mentioned to you in the car earlier, like when they come to Baton Rouge, I think that it's going to hurt them to not have a passing game. But then again, maybe it won't. Who knows? Auburn's kind of that team that plays with the juju, and maybe it works out for them. We'll see. The lack of depth defensively, you feel like cost this team. They were kind of gassed towards the end. You could tell in that last touchdown catch against Brock Bowers. Once again, Will, is this another case of not having the Jimmies and Joes necessarily to be able to keep up for a full 60 minutes? Was Georgia, especially in that 99-yard drive, that's when it kind of set in, we don't, you know, this is kind of feels like where this is going to start to take a turn in the favor of the visiting team.
Yeah, I mean, Auburn's starting 11 on defense, I think, is really solid. I think they're, at worst, a middle-of-the-pack SEC team. They play well, they play hard, but they just can't do it for 4 quarters for the entire game. I don't have it in front of me. Maybe you can find it. How many plays Georgia ran?
I'll look it up. Yeah, I got to look that up.
63 plays. Same that Auburn ran. But, you know, playing it at that level of intensity and that type of focus and knowing how hard it is against a team like Georgia for 63 plays, do it for 4 quarters is next to impossible. You look at the depth that Georgia has, their guys were fresh in the 4th quarter just because of the depth, and Auburn is not there yet.
Even with, and I'll note this, Will, even with Auburn running 40 to 63 plays as well. So they ran the same amount of plays. It just shows you kind of, once again, the depth concern that I think that it is. Does that only take that's just going to take time. And I think it's just a growing pain with where Auburn is as a program when you look at kind of that 85-man scholarship limit and what they're employing out there.
Yeah. And you still gotta admire what Hugh Freeze and his staff did in such a short amount of time with the amount of outgoings that Auburn had to be able to bring guys in, just to be able to field the team and field the team that's playing as well as they are. But it's a lack of depth, and Auburn, they're working to create some depth, create that quality depth. Hugh Freeze has talked about that at length. Kyan Lee, the true freshman corner, played nearly every snap, had 8 tackles.
He's going to be good. He's going to be
gonna
really
really
good.
good.
Yeah.
I mean, he's come in there and he's shown that he's an SEC level player. He showed it last week against Texas A&M, and he showed it again against Georgia. As much as Georgia targeted Brock Bowers, he kind of had a quiet day. He wasn't in the spotlight because Bowers wasn't his assignment, but still really impressed with him. But, you look on the back end in that secondary, Zion Puckett, Jalen Simpson, those guys are playing nearly every snap. And Simpson has been great. I think he and Malachi Starks are tied for the lead in the SEC with 4 interceptions already this year. And he had a pick. Both of those guys had a pick today. So, and Donovan Kaufman played nearly every snap, and we know he's been banged up. He left that Texas A&M game 3 or 4 times with injury. But Auburn just doesn't have the depth. I think they're up front. I think Auburn is good on that defensive line. I think they're okay. I think they feel pretty good. They feel like they're too deep, but in the secondary, I think they're kind of just one deep at this point. And if you look at this recruiting class, obviously Perry Thompson's the headliner. He's the 5-star, but Auburn really hitting that secondary, hitting those safety spots, the linebacker spots. Even linebacker, I think they're thin. Larry Nixon, Jalen McLeod, and Eugene Asante play nearly every snap at linebacker. And we know what Eugene Asante's done. So, but Auburn was just gassed. You said it on that last touchdown by Bowers. They just let him go. I mean, you're not going to get that guy down anyway at that point in the game, but Auburn was in it. They were still in it till the end, but just the tired legs on that defense, you could see it.
Yeah, I think too. I mean, the tired legs you mentioned. There's talent on the back end, and that's where you feel like the best talent was. It's just one deep. It's just a guy like Jalen Simpson who, I mean, he had the pick, and I remember we were on the phone while I was on that just godforsaken drive through the state of Mississippi, and you said he's got 4 picks in 5 games. Like that's really really good. The problem is the guys behind him can't. The drop off is just it's too much right now.
It really cost Auburn against Texas A&M with him and Zion Puckett getting banged up. They've got Colby Wooden back there, younger brother to Auburn legend. No, Colby Wooden is the Auburn legend.
Yes.
Caden Wooden? I'm blanking on his name now. Wooden. Colby Wooden's younger brother plays safety. They like him. He's number 2 at that safety spot behind Zion Puckett. And when Puckett went down against Texas A&M, Marquise Gilbert, they had to run him out there, and that's just a guy that doesn't have a ton of snaps. I think he was a 3-star recruit, so not a guy that they were expecting to throw out there this early in his career, especially in a conference game, and it cost him in that game. Auburn stayed pretty healthy in this game, but it doesn't matter. They don't have the bodies.
They don't have the bodies. I got you right here. Caleb Wooden, the brother of Colby, who's now with the Packers.
Brother of Colby.
Now with the
playing
Packers.
Really well. Had I think he at least won TFL on Thursday night.
Yeah. But yeah, no, look, defensively for what Auburn's been able to do, I think you have to admire it. And this has been a tough slate in a weird way. You faced, I don't even remember who was it, UMass they faced week 1 against Tyson Pumachan, you knew he was going to run the ball a lot. You go on the road, you face Cal, and it's just the whole idea of like flying all the way out there. That's tough. You take on a Samford team that really didn't pose a big challenge, but you didn't look fantastic. And then you go and you play, you really do all you can against A&M, and your offense doesn't answer. I think that as we kind of talk about, the bye week and what they need to use, one thing I would see and say is the resiliency. Like it's really easy. Will, I think LSU is going to start to deal with this, that you can have a divide in the locker room between the 2 position groups where, hey, we feel like we're really doing some heavy lifting, but you come out of this game feeling like both teams, both sides of the ball did the best they could. It just wasn't good enough. And obviously I know for the fans' perspective, they want it to be, but when you go into the bye week, and we're going to talk more about this Thursday, what is maybe one of the biggest things that you want to see this team really kind of tape down after the first 5 weeks of the season?
Well, more than anything else is get healthy. I mean, you got to be at 100%. Auburn gets this bye week early. They got 7 games left. So you've got to get healthy. And you're going to go down to Baton Rouge, which is a big game for Auburn. Another rivalry game for Auburn. They get back.
And they just announced it's going to be a night game too. So that's that. You add the element of that in there, and playing on the road is going to be tough.
Yeah, Tiger Stadium's always tough. It took Auburn 20 years to go down there and win. They finally did it 2 years ago, which is the only notable win Brian Harsin ever got at Auburn. But you got to be healthy going into that game if you want any chance. Just quick note on what you mentioned about the divide in the locker room. Everybody close to the team, people that have been on the sidelines, they're all saying there's not been even an idea of that. There's not even been a whisper of some dissent from either side of the ball complaining about the other. So I think another, feather in the cap of Hugh Freeze. He's brought this team together. They play as a team. And you can use a bye week for this too, just to continue to mesh and gel as a team and keep playing for each other. Because this year, that's all Auburn can do. They got, if they're going to win any game they win, it's because they win it as a team. It's not on anybody or one side of the ball. It's got to be complete. Auburn just doesn't have those difference makers on both sides of the ball to really be able to win a game. They've got the guys, especially in the back end on that secondary, to change games. I don't know about to win them necessarily. But, like I said, got to be healthy, number one. Continue to gel as a team, number two. And three, you got to look at the offensive side of the ball and come up with some semblance of a passing game. I mean, I really think they've got to get on the receivers. I'm really, really pushing the blame toward the receivers at this point because Thorne, I think he's starting to settle. He really showed that against Georgia. There was a play in particular we looked at. I don't remember I think it was second quarter. Third down, Thorne took a sack. Auburn bunches, if you go back and watch on the bottom of your screen, left side of the formation, they bunched three receivers, and all of them run an out route to the left to Auburn sideline. Hugh Freeze has talked about it. His offense, he really puts the onus on the receivers. He gives option routes on nearly every play, and it's hard to tell from that sideline cam, but it looks like Thorne is looking to the middle of the field. And I think he's looking at Jay Fair to cut across the middle, which is wide open. There's not a Georgia defender in the middle of the field. They would have picked up the first down. They all run the out route. There's just too many bodies over there, and Thorne has to take a sack. I think the receivers, they need to improve big time and just keep working on that chemistry. I don't think Thorne really has chemistry with any of the receivers because of how inconsistent the play has been on both of them, both position groups. But I think as Thorne is starting to settle and really see the ideas come to fruition that Hugh Freeze and Philip Montgomery have for this offense, he's starting to trust them more. They've got to improve the pass game. Honestly, if you go down to LSU and throw for 100 yards, you got to feel good about it, just as poor as this passing game has been.
Yeah, 4 out of their last 7 games, that they'll have this season, the next 7, which will end the regular season, are at home. Obviously, once you got to go to Baton Rouge, you got to go to Nashville and Fayetteville. In between that. So really, really like where this schedule can end up. You get Ole Miss at home. You get Mississippi State. We'll talk more about this on Thursday. Definitely a path to a bowl game. I still believe, especially, with and I would have still said that before this. I think definitely leaving the Georgia game, 6 wins has to be the floor. To me, I don't know. That's where I would sit.
I don't know if you said it, if you heard me say it last night, being in the background of your Georgia Tech show. The floor for every Power 5 team. There's no reasons for any Power 5 team, Georgia Tech, Auburn, Vanderbilt, that 6 wins is not your goal. There's no reason any Power 5 team, in my opinion, should not be able to get to 6 wins. A bowl game has to be the bare minimum if you're a Power 5 team. That really was the bare minimum for Auburn this year. Some people thought Auburn could win 9 games. I thought there was a path, but I think they were hoping Thorne would be better. But Auburn, this game, the bye week comes at a good time for Auburn because Auburn has something to build on off the Georgia game.
Yeah,
up against a really good opponent. There's some hope, and I've mentioned it to a couple people. Quick look ahead at Auburn's schedule and what I've seen so far through the first 5 weeks. I like how Auburn matches up against just about everybody left on the schedule. I think LSU might be the hardest game left on the schedule because it's at Baton Rouge, we know, and Auburn can't figure out how to crack the voodoo down there. Just 1 win in 20 years down there. But I don't really know. We'll talk about more Thursday and next week about this matchup, but LSU's defense is not good. They're not good. God. I think Auburn can take advantage of that. Ole Miss, that is going to be a rocking Jordan-Hare Stadium. You thought the Georgia game was loud and intense. I'm ready to see the Ole Miss game after the Lane Kiffin drama last offseason.
Oh my gosh.
Season and off season. I think that it's going to be a madhouse. Mississippi State, not too great. I think Auburn has a good chance there. Arkansas is very interesting. I think they're underperforming, and Auburn going to Fayetteville is going to be a challenge. Vanderbilt's Vanderbilt. They came out of the gates hot, and they haven't played well the last few weeks. New Mexico State should be straightforward for Auburn. They handled UMass and Samford. And then Alabama. Auburn's got them at home. You always like your chances against Alabama at home.
Yeah, there have been some pretty bad Auburn teams that have challenged Alabama when you play inside the confines of Jordan-Hare Stadium, no doubt about it. But yeah, no, we'll talk about it on Thursday, obviously kind of recapping what's happened through the first 5 weeks for Auburn, why this bye week comes at a great time, and taking a look ahead. We'll do a deep dive into that. And as well next week, I mean, hey, you and I will get to go really into this LSU Auburn game. It'll be a lot of fun to talk about. So
popcorn for that show, because that might be a long one.
That might be a long one. We got a lot to talk about. LSU's defense is just awful, and it's going to be very, very interesting to watch. But the offense is national championship level. So can Auburn stop that? I don't know. It'll be very interesting to see. But we'll talk about that more. Make sure you check us out on thecrowdedbooth.com, Facebook, Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it at this point. You can follow us on social media. You see down there below our names as well. Thanks so much for listening. Make sure to smash that like button, hit subscribe, and set up notifications. We'll be live tonight. If you're watching this on Monday, we're live tonight recapping, and we'll talk a little bit about this game, obviously, as well. We'll give some of the thoughts, but this is kind of more the deep dive into those games coming out Monday and Thursdays, talking all things Auburn Tigers. We'll catch you next time here on an episode of The Crowded Booth.
Pile in here and make yourself feel at home. The Crowded Booth is coming on. The Crowded Booth with Bryce Koon.